set you free. The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free.
Hello, and welcome to the Tech Dirt Podcast. I'm Mike Mausnick again. Once again, I want to thank everyone who's been listening and providing feedback. We really appreciate it. If you like the show, please also let others know about it as well. We're not looking necessarily to become as popular as Serial, but it would be great if more people interested in these topics were listening. Today, we're talking about broadband, specifically municipal broadband. In the past, we've discussed the idea of broadband from the skies via satellites, drones, blimps, and balloons. But those all seem to be a bit further out as possibilities. The key, as we noted, is providing more competition to the limited oligopoly that we see today in broadband internet access providers. However, rather than going up to the sky, there are some more down-to-earth options, and a big one that people talk about a lot is municipal broadband. Basically, a city providing its own broadband services, not unlike the way that cities often provide water services or garbage pickup. The idea, of course, is that municipal broadband provider can provide real competition to the big ISPs like Comcast, Verizon, and AT&T. Municipal broadband, generally speaking, tends to be a high-speed, lower-cost fiber optic connection with a focus on serving the community, encouraging connected citizens and businesses, often in the hope that it will help the local economy. There are many examples of Muni Broadband success stories, with the most popular ones being Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Lafayette, Louisiana. Now, the argument against municipal broadband is, in short, whether or not it makes sense or is appropriate for local government to run a broadband service. Critics point to the fact that local bureaucracies are not exactly known for being particularly efficient or innovative. Others argue that it's unfair for taxpayer money to be used to compete with private company offerings. And indeed, there are some notable failures with poorly implemented municipal broadband projects. Currently, 19 states have laws that ban municipal broadband, most of which were authored by lobbyists from the big ISPs not wanting any competition. Current FCC boss Tom Wheeler has argued that the FCC should be using its powers to preempt those laws, and most recently, President Obama similarly came out against those laws, noting that they hold back competition. And that's resulted in a fight, with some claiming that this is the federal government trying to take power away from state governments, though it's kind of amusing that those same people who argue that don't seem to mind state governments taking power away from municipal governments. So for today's discussion, is municipal broadband a good thing that provides true competition and better internet services for local communities, or is it governments interfering with the private sector and adding an inefficient bureaucratic mess to the free market? Here to discuss, once again, Hirsch Reddy and Dennis Yang.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Hello and welcome.
So, well, I guess one way you can look at the situation in the United States is that we have a kind of a mixture of several different problems, right? We have a country that is a little bit bigger than some of the other jurisdictions where people have successful broadband competition, and because it's bigger, there's significantly more investment sometimes needed to do this last mile kind of delivery of packets.
Right, if you want to cover everybody. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, we have some perhaps badly doled out incentives that were given to telecom companies, which because we wanted to incentivize them to build these networks. Mm-hmm. And so the government may have promised certain things or erected certain barriers to entry in certain local markets in order to encourage entrance, right? And as a result of those barriers now down the line, we find these companies that did invest in the networks to some extent abusing their monopoly positions. I don't know if I think that's actually not an abusive way of describing the situation, right? I mean, the rates we have here in the United States are very high and our network performance is not very good. And then on top of that, not only charging the consumers a lot more and not giving them a good service, on the back end, they're also demanding money from other participants in the stack, right? So we know these abuses. So the question is, what's the solution? And if we say we want the government to step in and compete here, the classic libertarian argument against it is, why are we getting the government involved? Because the government, when you subsidize something from taxes, it removes consumer choice again. Mm-hmm. Essentially, they're restating the situation we're already in, but in this case, the the future villain would be the government. The government would tax us, force us to use a government utility. We wouldn't really have a private sector option. Well, my answer to that is actually the situation right now is not very different than a government monopoly, except a private party is standing in the shoes of the government. Most people have only one choice for a broadband provider.
Right.
And that broadband provider is sometimes rated worse than the state's DMV in that state, right? Like in the case of Comcast. And we have numerous videos and recordings online of people being abused by customer service at Comcast. And so to some extent, you can fight this on ideological lines, and that when I hear like a lot of the commentary on Fox News or online, sort of more conservative economic interests.
You watch Fox News?
No, but I wouldn't turn it on personally. But sometimes I hang out at people's houses.
Just checking.
Yeah. But basically, they make valid points in terms of the kinds of fears you should have about monopolizing something under the government, but at the same time, they have to understand that we don't actually have a full free market in this in the sector. And so if you encourage municipal governments to enter, there is a danger that, yes, the danger is if the municipal government builds a local network, once you get into sort of that trough, it's hard to climb out of it if the municipal government doesn't do a good job, because what's the incentive for anybody else to come in once everyone automatically has to pay for the municipal service through taxes? No, as long as we say the municipal service is paid through fees, maybe the infrastructure is built out with maybe you raise a municipal bond or whatever, but as long as the operations are paid through fees, as opposed to a universal tax on the local inhabitants, I think that is something I think everyone, just from a pragmatic point of view, can get behind.
Right. So in that sense, it's built more like a utility than say just a mandated like tax and spend, whatever.
Right, where you're paying fees. So
right.
And in fact, in cases where we have seen municipal broadband or sort of similar broadband competition come into play, so far it doesn't seem like it actually really crowds out competition. It tends to drive that competition to actually innovate. So, when there's strong municipal broadband, then suddenly AT&T and Comcast suddenly start upgrading that network in those places because they're actually competing. So it's actually bringing in competition as opposed to driving out competition.
Right. I mean, because isn't it the case that essentially, like what you mentioned, like a natural monopoly has essentially already occurred in many of these locations, right?
Yeah. But it's not even, it's a question of, is it a natural monopoly or not? And there are different arguments there. And you can say it's only really efficient to lay the, if it's fiber, lay the fiber once, right? But even otherwise, if you're, this isn't even so much a natural monopoly situation. It's really just adding a third competitor to your DSL and your cable provider, right? They're not using the same infrastructure. They may be using the same rights of way or telephone poles or conduits or something along those lines.
It might be more efficient actually from just a competition point of view for local governments to actually go ahead and build the local infrastructure and then put in place sort of leasing and operation rules that allow free access. Like if you look in London, there isn't one government provider for broadband. Rather, I mean, you have dozens of people that will provide you broadband. They're essentially using the same line. You don't have dozens of lines.
It's all based on BT so it's open access rules. So
and there's different flavors if you want.
And is that kind of in similar way to our deregulated like energy market? Is that similar or? I'm not familiar.
Well, we have a really weirdly deregulated energy market in California. We really shouldn't get into that.
That's a whole
because you can deregulate the supply side, you can deregulate the demand side, and there's all kinds of stuff.
So there are different arguments, right? So one is, and this is an argument that people have made, which is that maybe it makes sense for the government to build out just in the highest possible speed, highest possible kind of fiber network, just bring it to every home and then just be the wholesaler and let anyone come in and offer service on top of it. And that was
so if I wanted to offer broadband service with excellent customer service as my one differentiating point, I could do that, right?
Or shitty customer service,
depending on shitty customer service with good prices.
Right, exactly. So, but here's the thing, right? Like everyone can get behind that common sense idea, except because like think about this, in that world. In that BT Telecom
in a world
like in London with the BT Telecom, I can guarantee you those local ISPs do not enjoy the margins that our American telecoms
of course
enjoy.
not.
And that those are the people. I mean, AT&T, Verizon, Comcast. I mean, these guys are going to fight tooth and nail.
Right. I mean, but should you
stop
be
that.
enjoy? Like, is it a right to enjoy margins? Shouldn't you be fighting for the margins that
exactly.
you're getting? Yeah.
I mean, that's a surest indication that there's something deeply wrong.
And then there are still opportunities for margins, right? I mean, the opportunities are to provide
absolutely.
better services on top of that, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, there have been attempts to do this, and in fact, for years in Australia, the plan was for what they called I forget what it was, like Next Generation Network, I think, NGN.
Yeah.
In Australia was this idea that the government was going to spend billions of dollars and install fiber to everywhere, and then anyone could offer service on top of it. And then, of course, over years, they've chipped away at that plan.
Why did that not work?
The billions of dollars, I think.
Right.
And
Australia is gigantic.
and well, yeah.
And very what's the opposite of dense? Very a sprinkled population.
Which actually, I mean, is I mean, if and I don't know the specifics of that plan in terms of if it was really only to do along the coast, which is
then that would be
right. If it was just along the
90%.
coast, you could argue
It's getting that last 5% that are in the interior. That's difficult.
Yeah, and maybe those people you could deal with differently. But if I think the issue was it was hundreds of billions of dollars committed to this project,
right?
And you just had sort of changing governments and things, and so it just sort of got chipped away. And there is still there's still officially that plan is still in place, but I was just reading something about people complaining about how they were promised full broadband, and there was one who was saying my neighbor got it 18 months ago and I still can't get it, and how difficult is it to run?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, what's the goal, the big goal of municipal broadband, or not just municipal broadband, but what's the ultimate vision for broadband access for the entire country?
See, that's the danger of I really think articulating a vision actually constrains what some of the best possibilities, because if we had tried to articulate what a broadband vision should be in the year 2010, if we had done that right when the internet was taking off in, let's say, 1996 or 97, it would have articulated the absolute wrong vision, right? I mean, Wi-Fi hadn't even taken off, right? We couldn't imagine that smartphones and handheld devices would be the primary way people would want to get information. So to some extent, in fact, even this building of fiber to the last mile, I'm not sure if that's the best way to do it. To some extent, we might just want the FCC to deregulate a whole bunch of really sweet white space spectrum and then encourage people to use that. Maybe we establish some broad rules of the road which say that you can only, whatever protocol you run in this white space spectrum has to be disciplined in certain ways so you're not shouting down other people's protocols or something like that. Or maybe just set a standard protocol that will operate in the white space spectrum, whether it's 802.11 or whatever, and then just let people essentially peer-to-peer it.
Those are two different things, though, right? Isn't municipal broadband typically is discussing what
It is, but
and
what I'm saying is
are
you might not need it.
Well,
if you have very fast wireless.
And I've had these arguments for years. I mean, going back 15 years, I had this argument with somebody who was arguing for installing fiber everywhere, and I was like, screw fiber, just do wireless and free up the spectrum. Exactly what you were saying. It was just like,
well, maybe, I mean, I don't think any one solution is
right.
The right solution. The right solution depends on where you are.
Well,
right?
and you certainly could have multiple solutions, but the fact is, the amount of bandwidth and latency and things that you can get from fiber just so far outshines wireless that if you believe that true high-speed broadband is really important to the infrastructure, you need the fiber.
Well, let's get to Dennis's question then, because it seems like we're talking at right angles to each other. Because if for you broadband is gigabit internet, then I would probably agree with you. But if we're talking about 70 megabits down, 100 megabits down, I get wireless internet to my home right now. The provider's name is WebPass, and they basically put a line of sight microwave transmitters, I guess, on top of it.
Not sponsoring this program.
They're really good. They're amazing. Let's give them. They really deserve a free shout out. It's really great. It's so much better than any other.
Well, if they want to sponsor us,
exactly. Well, I'm going to give them the free shout out. Screw you, Mike. But no, I think they're amazing. They're do a really good job. I get 70 megabits down. I can basically stream essentially 4K video, right? And this is coming down over a microwave tight link. It's from what I understand. I might be completely misstating what their technology is, but I do know it's not wired. right?
Right.
They put an expensive transmitter on top of apartment buildings and then service everyone in the apartment buildings using the legacy copper wiring that's in the building.
Right.
So there's no fiber involved anywhere. And it is, I'll tell you, it's an order of magnitude better than any Comcast service I got. And Comcast, as you know, comes in
Right.
over wire.
So then what would municipal broadband in San Francisco kind of add to this mix?
I don't think municipal broadband is necessarily required in San Francisco. Maybe in some neighborhoods. I actually shouldn't speak for everyone, but certainly in Soma, we have so many options.
Right.
Municipal broadband probably. No, here's the thing. If everyone wants gigabit internet,
Right.
that's a different thing. That's why I was trying to press Mike on this. Like, if we want gigabit internet, then we really do need something wired, right? As far as I know, maybe there is some really good technology that could do it with the wireless.
Technology does tend to get better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I just don't know enough about the wireless. So that's,
bringing it back to the question that I initially asked, which is like, what is the vision here? Like, is it that we have broadband internet access in the entire United States, no matter where you're standing, right? Or to every household, or to every household within a city that is larger than some number? Like, what is it? What does it mean?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I like the municipal solution, because you don't have to articulate a national standard, and that's where we get all the government inefficiencies and right. You just let every community decide for themselves. Somebody in Anchorage, Alaska says, "Hey, we really just want to be able to watch YouTube videos. We don't care about the latency so much." Someone else says, "Hey, we really want gigabit." Like Kansas probably loves a gigabit.
Right. So as far as competition is concerned, doesn't that seems like a good thing to let the municipalities
right. So if part of the argument there is that we're, as we mentioned before, is that it's increasing competition by adding another player.
Yes.
The question is whether or not people are okay with that other player being a government player, and that's where some people certainly begin to get worried.
But let's not lump in local government with federal government, right?
Sure.
Like when we're talking about certainly local government can be very inefficient. There's corruption there too, and ironically, probably gets with the amount of money that gets wasted in local government, it gets a far less scrutiny than national government, right? Regardless, though, to some extent, municipal government being closer to you has to be more responsive to the citizens that are paying those taxes. They're much closer. And if your broadband really does suffer, I guarantee you that local government, those officials are going to get, pushed out of office probably. Because it's not like in the case of like the federal government where your senator does a good job, but there's probably another 10 million citizens along with you voting for him, and they probably don't share your broadband concerns. So it's not going to replace your senator. So locally, I think broadband is exactly the kind of thing. Power, sewage, water. I mean, those things when they fail locally, heads roll, right? So I think we could get a very responsive government solution in that situation,
right?
So,
but do you still worry? I guess so. I mean, I agree with you for the most part, but at the same time, I think of I don't live in San Francisco, right? I live outside in a smaller city, and I think of my local government, and all I think about is, this sort of, small city government that
the goofballs, basically.
Right. And I don't want to insult. That's why I'm not naming
goofball except for Mike's local government. Yeah. Typically, I mean, you see loonies, right? Like we see, at least they show up at the town halls, but there are technocrats in every place. And the thing is, like, I know exactly what you're going to say, which is like, are these guys capable of putting together the kind of broadband I want to pay for?
Right.
But they don't really have to, right? From what we've said. Like, so let me put it to you this way.
I mean, is it a waste? It's a waste issue, right? Like you're concerned that it would be a waste of resources, time, and energy for a municipal government to attack this problem.
And then on top of that, not only is it a waste in terms of there are trade-offs, right? They have to choose what they should be focusing on, and then second of all, are they going to be able to do a semi-decent job of it?
Right.
So just to bring up the point further, so the people who are then going to actually build the network and set it up and structure it, do I trust them to be as innovative as a startup? And I don't know that I do.
I mean, it's the whole there are a lot of potholes on the roads right now. They should fix
Giant,
those instead
giant
of
one
trying.
in front of my house. in
Yeah,
fact.
like instead of trying to build broadband internet, which
That's a great point, and the resource allocation problem is something that I think every community has to decide. Like, I fully agree. If the roads are so potholed the cars can't go through them,
Right.
that's a priority over broadband.
so do we want Leslie Knope running our broadband initiatives?
So here's the thing. I actually think Leslie Knope is actually not worse than the local representative from the dumber goof from Comcast who
Sure.
Comcast is less responsive to local people than a local government would be, simply because they're huge, and
Right.
and Dennis Yang complaining in his little home in his pajamas just doesn't matter. I mean, they don't care.
I mean, could you make the argument then that this is something that local government, municipal governments could also outsource, right?
Yeah.
So bring in a
Right.
third party company
God,
to
I hate local government contract out. You want to talk about corruption? I mean, but you're probably right. It probably should be doled out. But I mean, there's going to be a lot of slop there. But maybe even with that slop and everyone feeding at the trough, maybe even then it ends up being better than Comcast, because, I mean,
So and then do we have any opinion? I mentioned in the opening this is the fact that there were the 19 state laws that outlaw municipal broadband or restrict it in serious ways. So do we think that those laws should go away?
well,
I mean, I think so, right? Like, I think it seems like it should be up to the local municipal, like
Right,
cities.
but
to
then you
decide
could
that.
argue,
Yeah.
but
The states
the states
can-
have power too, right?
wasn't it you, Masnik, that like kind of listed the tortuous history of these laws? Right?
Yeah, sure.
Like, first, the state governments prevented the local governments
Yeah,
from building municipal broadband, and then the FCC told the state governments that they were not allowed to ban the local governments from building municipal broadband,
Right.
and then Congress told the FCC that the FCC is not allowed to tell state governments
That they're not.
to tell municipal governments not to build local broadband. So it's going to go all the way up, and now the president is telling the Congress.
Right.
It's so, I mean, all of this will wind all the way to the top, and then the administration possibly will change in the next election.
I mean,
it'll
and
go
the
away.
fact is, right? I mean, if you take a step back and you look at it, I mean, this was sort of a devil's advocate argument because all of those state laws were written by the Comcast and Time Warner cables, and there was the famous case, and I can't remember which state, North Carolina, I think, or somewhere around there, where there was a hearing about a proposed law to ban municipal broadband, and someone asked a question, and the state legislator literally turned to a Time Warner cable lobbyist and said, "I don't know, that you got to answer this one." And it was just like, I mean,
Awkward.
could you be any more transparent in a bad way about the fact that who wrote that actual law?
These special interests are such goofballs. Like, remember the situation where they sent the letter? What was it? The RIAA or somebody sent the letter to an attorney general, and then the meta information in the Microsoft Word document showed who wrote it. It's just embarrassing.
Yeah, or the other one that's along those lines was the anti-Uber legislation, where the legislator was so quick to photocopy and send it out, he left the taxi lobbyist business card mixed in with it that showed who had actually written it.
Special interests in this country have gotten to it's become so commonplace that people don't even get shot.
Right. So I mean, so part of that point is, right, in some ways, these guys, the big broadband players, have the government so much in their pocket that already, we could look at today's broadband and say it is government broadband. Yeah. It's just because the big broadband players already own it, and this is actually,
and they already have the local contracts, even though it's not official, basically.
Right. So this is in many ways municipal broadband is a way for local governments to effectively take back the fight for
introduce some competition, essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if I wanted to start a private competitor to Comcast, would that be a feasible project or no? Like,
what, nationally? I don't think so. Locally,
or even on
sure.
on a local level.
I mean,
yes,
so
right?
look at so the examples.
WebPass, I guess, is going to do a good job, right?
Right, but
Monkey Brains.
So, but all the examples are local, right? So you have WebPass, you have Sonic.net, and around here and things like that.
Yep.
We have Google Fiber, obviously trying to do installs, but the way Google Fiber's worked is that they've been able to go into different cities or places and then get incredible concessions from those local places to allow them to install stuff, right?
Right.
So the issue then comes back to if
'Cause
you're
they still need rights of way. And,
you need rights of way or access to poles or
And there's so many complications there. You want to talk about regulatory barriers to entry, just
Right.
the fact that a local jurisdiction would probably, in some cases, prevent Google from putting their own fiber on telephone poles because AT&T or Comcast or someone like that says that's our telephone poles, even though it's
Right.
built on public land and the telephone pole is probably public. Just they say, hey, if Google wants to put their stuff on these telephone poles, they got to replace the entire telephone pole with a new telephone pole or something absurd, which makes the price of actually installing the cabling just impossible.
And which goes back to the other argument, which is that all of these things, the poles and the rights of way and the access are those are controlled by the government or
It's already
by
controlled
by
by
the
the
representative of
government.
the people
Yeah.
to some extent. And therefore, these are already sort of highly regulated things. What's the difference in just sort of adding one more wire to it? Now, let me throw in one more possibility complication to this whole discussion, and then we'll close it out. So one way that people have talked about doing this, and this was a proposal that was championed by an old professor of mine, and they did try and do it in Vermont or New Hampshire, and I'm forgetting exactly where, and I don't know quite how that project ended up going. But the idea there was municipal fiber, except the difference was rather than government owned, it was citizen owned.
Okay.
Which is a slight difference, but it actually basically got all of the residents in that city to get ownership of this new municipal competitor, and then they owned it and controlled it without it being government run. So is that an alternative?
What is it? How
what's the nuance there? Is it
So
do you buy stock into it? Is it co-op?
Yeah.
it's effectively a sort of
Right.
co-op setup.
but if I move away, I cannot continue to own that stock? Or?
Right. You're
So-
basically selling your share in the
Right.
in the cooperatively owned.
So do I get a payout every being an Alaska state citizen?
That I don't know. I mean,
they
those
make
are
a
different
profit,
specifics.
perhaps.
You can,
There's a profit, yeah.
There are some organizations that are co-ops. I can't remember, but there was something I can't remember now that I was a member of, and I got a check at the end of the year.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I
It's
obviously
like REI.
Yeah, there
or-
you go.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or the
Something
Green Bay
like that.
the Green Bay Packers, right?
They did that a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
don't
They
do
were a
that
co-op league.
They have shares.
Are they still?
I think.
Okay.
Anyway, but
we
so
got
I mean, I guess I don't really understand the nuance between
Well,
it's
it's just
a citizen owned versus a government, because isn't the government
it-
for us sort of?
yeah, but they right. So in theory,
Yeah.
there's no difference there, right?
Right.
But the argument here is that it's a little bit more direct ownership, and you have a little bit more say and control, and it's not because it's not the government. They can't suddenly tax it, right?
I see.
So it's there's still going to be a board and control, and
Well, as a citizen, can I opt out of it then?
Sure, you just don't use it. Yeah.
yeah.
Then you're not paying the co-op.
I'm
fees,
not paying the co-op fees, and I don't use it.
Actually, I
Again,
like that.
these are
Yeah.
specifics that can be
Yeah.
determined, I imagine, but.
I mean, there to some extent, when I think about that, if there's so much demand that citizens really want to band together and do that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how could anyone who calls themselves libertarian be against that? That's the essence. Like community action, you get together and you solve the problem without forcing people to pay taxes to do it. I mean,
Right.
you should get so behind that. Anything that prevents that, you should definitely
And yet,
abolish that. And yet,
if you look at the sort of official libertarian positions, they generally are against municipal broadband.
well, maybe because they understand it to be the other thing, the tax funded thing. In which case, that's a little different.
Or they don't understand broadband or the current broadband market.
This is complicated. Yeah.
All right. So, do we have any final thoughts, or have we used up our final thoughts?
Sufficiently confused us.
Final thoughts. Live in San Francisco. Don't have these problems. No, but seriously though, I mean, the number of jurisdictions where it's getting easier to get broadband. I mean, not just broadband, like fiber. Like for example, I just found out recently that Sebastopol, California, which
Yeah.
is that little town north of us,
Yeah.
tiny town, basically.
But O'Reilly is based there. So
Yeah, O'Reilly is based there.
And-
they
and-
have fiber, right? From Sonic?
Sonic.net is there. So yeah.
that's where they're based.
That's extraordinary.
Right nearby Santa Rosa.
Okay.
But next door. But that is, I mean, right. So Sonic.net is trying to install fiber all over California. I'm waiting for it to come to my house. It hasn't quite gotten there. Are they going to actually expand in South Bay? Oh yeah, they're expanding all over. And I mean, I have Sonic now on DSL, which they don't offer anymore. They've dropped their what they call legacy DSL, but they keep us lucky legacy customers. But I mean, so there's an argument there that, like, you wait long enough, competition will show up. It is starting to show up in this particular area. Is it possible that you could do that without municipal broadband?
Possibly. It
Yeah,
really
I
depends
think-
on the laws, right?
Right. And I think the overall vision here is the one I would love to take a look at and say, like, what are we trying to do here? And is competition going to essentially satisfy the end goal here, which is, maybe this is everyone gets fiber to their home? Like, what's the best way to get there? I think it depends. And to me, that's the most compelling reason to support municipal broadband, is to let each city and each locale kind of figure it out for their own. And these overarching, prohibitions on municipal broadband seem kind of, very, very aligned to the special interest.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah. I think what it comes down to in the end is just, I think providing more competition is important and good. And in most of these markets, there isn't real competition. This is an opportunity to get in real competition. It lets local people band together, whether through government or through some other format, and get real competition, which drives a lot of other good things. So in the end, I'm all for it. And I recognize that some of them are going to fail, some of them are going to be bureaucratic messes, but overall, I think those are messes that should be allowed to be tried, and if they fail, people learn from them and get better from it. Anyways, I think that's it for today's podcast on municipal broadband. Hirsch, Dennis, thanks for joining us.
It's been said that the first casualty of war is truth, and I'm inclined to agree. Listen, we live in an age of instant information, so isn't it strange that things have been hidden away from us? Governments think we need to gain their trust, but it's the other way around. Just take a look. Nothing tells us more than raw data does, so it's important it's all available to us. Plus, put up for debate and looked at by the public's gaze, because there's a lot more to be gained from taking on.